The water was cold. Not just cold, but that deep, biting kind of cold that sinks into your bones. A reminder that spring in the mountains is still just winter with better marketing. I stood knee-deep in the lake, the familiar weight of my old fluorometer in my hand. It's a simple tool, measures what's dissolved in the water. For me, it was more. A gift from my old mentor, its metal casing covered in a web of scratches, each one a story. It felt like an extension of my own senses. The scent of damp earth and pine needles was thick in the air. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. I'd just finished the guest cabin, a small but sturdy structure tucked away by the shore. I even made a sign for it. Quiet Cove. That piece lasted about 90 seconds. A sharp, piercing shriek cut through the quiet. "You! Get out of the water! Now!" I turned. On the shore, silhouetted against the bright morning sun, was a figure that needed no introduction. Karen, president of our Homeowners Association, flanked by two guys in work vests who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. She was pointing a perfectly manicured finger, not at me, but at my new cabin. Her face was a mask of furious indignation. If you're watching Karenology, you probably know the look. It's a special blend of entitlement and absolute certainty. "What in the hell is going on?" I yelled, wading back towards the bank. My boots squelched in the mud. "We are rectifying a violation, Mr. Sullivan," she announced, her voice carrying across the water with the force of a command. As I got closer, I saw one of the workers take a crowbar to my new sign. The sound of splintering pine echoed in the quiet cove. It was a clean, brutal crack that felt like a punch to the gut. The letters I'd carefully painted, Quiet Cove, split right down the middle. I climbed onto the bank, water streaming from my waders. "That's private property. You have no right." Karen gave a small, condescending smile. It didn't reach her eyes. You ever see a shark smile? Like that. According to the bylaws, the Homeowners Association has every right to remove unapproved signage that violates our community's aesthetic standards. She held out a folded piece of paper. When I didn't take it, she let it drop at my feet. It landed in a puddle with a soft splash. "And here is your fine." I looked down at the soggy paper, then back at the pieces of my sign on the ground. The two colors I'd used, a deep, earthy ochre and a calm, watery blue, were apparently the problem. "What aesthetic standard did I violate?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. "Our community guidelines clearly state that all structures must conform to the natural palette of the landscape," she recited, as if reading from a sacred text. "Your garish colors are a visual pollutant." Garish? They were the colors of the earth and the water I was standing in. Have you ever been in a situation so absurd you weren't sure if you should laugh or start swinging? I felt my hands clench into fists. If you've ever dealt with a power trip like that, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Go ahead and hit that like button, because this was only the beginning. The workers finished their job, tossing the broken pieces of wood near the tree line like trash. They wouldn't meet my eyes. Karen gave one last, satisfied look at the now bare front of my cabin, then at me. "Pay the fine within 30 days, Mr. Sullivan. $2,000, and I suggest you consult the approved color chart before you even think about painting again." She turned and marched away, her two henchmen trailing behind her. I stood there for a long time, the cold water seeping through my clothes, the smell of pine now mixed with something acrid, humiliation. I looked at the soggy piece of paper at my feet, $2,000. I looked at the broken sign. I looked at the calm, silent water of the lake. A memory flickered. My mentor, years ago, looking at a failed project of mine. He wasn't angry, just disappointed. "You always turn everything into a war, Michael," he'd said. I thought I'd changed. But as I bent down and picked up the fine, the paper flimsy and cold in my hand, I knew this wasn't about paint. It was never about the paint. This was a message. I looked at my cabin, then back at the path where she'd disappeared. She'd made a mistake. She thought she was picking a fight over colors. She was about to find out the fight was over water, and I knew things about water she couldn't even imagine. I wrung the water out of the fine notice, the ink bleeding into a blurry blue mess. $2,000. The number seemed almost comical. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about the sheer, unadulterated arrogance. Let me back up a little. I'd moved to this lakeside community 6 months ago, looking for quiet. After a career in hydrology that ended poorly, let's say, Quiet was all I wanted. I bought a small plot of land, built my main house, and then the guest cabin down by the water. It was my sanctuary, a place to work, to think, to forget. I called an emergency meeting of the Homeowners Association board. I was naive, I see that now. I thought logic would work. The meeting was held in a stuffy wood-paneled room in the community clubhouse that smelled of old coffee and stale air. There were 3 of them at the table: Karen, radiating smug authority; a nervous-looking accountant named Henderson, who kept adjusting his glasses; and a former car salesman with a plastic smile that never wavered. I laid my case out calmly. I brought photos of the local landscape, the ochre-colored clay banks, the deep blue of the lake at dusk. These aren't garish colors, I explained, my voice echoing slightly in the small room. They're the literal colors of this place. They're historical colors for this region. Karen let me finish. She steepled her fingers, a picture of patronizing patience. Mr. Sullivan, we appreciate your artistic interpretation. The way she said artistic made it sound like a mental deficiency. However, the bylaws are not open to interpretation. They are rules. And the approved palette, which was provided to you when you purchased your property, does not include ochre or lake blue. The car salesman nodded vigorously. Rules are rules, keeps the property values up. Can't have everyone just painting their houses whatever color they feel like. I turned to Henderson, the accountant. You see this, right? This is an abuse of power. The rule is vague. Natural palette can mean anything. Henderson looked from me to Karen, a bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple. He cleared his throat. Well, the board's interpretation has always been consistent. He mumbled, his eyes fixed on the tabletop. It was like watching a puppet whose strings were being pulled too tight. He was terrified of her. That's when I knew I'd already lost. It wasn't a discussion, it was a sentencing. I felt a hot flush of anger rise up my neck, the same old fury I'd spent years trying to bury. So, this is it? You invent a violation, issue a fine, and there's no appeal, no common sense? Karen's smile widened. You can appeal by painting your cabin an approved shade of beige and paying your fine. She leaned forward slightly. Or we can start adding late fees, $100 a day. Your choice. The air in the room felt thick, heavy. I looked at their faces, one triumphant, one sycophantic, one cowed. This wasn't a board meeting. It was a courtroom in a banana republic. I'd walked right into her trap. I had expected a fight, but I had expected it to be a fair one. What a fool I was. Have you ever been in a room where you were the only one speaking a language everyone else refused to understand? I stood up, my chair scraping harshly against the floor. I didn't say another word. I just looked at Karen, holding her gaze for a long moment. I wanted her to see that she hadn't beaten me. Not yet. I just hadn't figured out the rules of her game. But I would. I turned and walked out, the sound of their quiet, confident chatter following me down the hall. The stale air of the clubhouse felt like it was choking me. As the heavy door swung shut behind me, the cool evening air was a relief. I took a deep breath, the scent of the coming rain sharp and clean. The fight had just escalated, and I was on the defensive. But that's when a different thought crept in. What if defending wasn't the right move? What if I needed to attack? I just didn't know where to aim. Not yet. The next blow came not from a letter or a fine, but from the court of public opinion. And let me tell you, that court is swift, brutal, and doesn't give a damn about evidence. The next general meeting for all the residents was held in the local school's gymnasium. The air was thick with the smell of floor wax and simmering resentment. I went in thinking I could talk to my neighbors, people I'd shared a polite wave with for months. I thought I could make them see reason. I was wrong. Karen had been busy. She stood at the podium, a master of ceremonies at my public execution. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She spoke in that calm, concerned tone that's far more dangerous than shouting. We all want to protect our community, she began, her gaze sweeping across the 200 or so faces staring back at her. We want to protect our investment, the beauty of our homes, and the harmony we've all worked so hard to build. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. Then she turned her attention to me, sitting in the third row. A spotlight couldn't have made me feel more exposed. Unfortunately, we have a resident, Mr. Sullivan, who believes the rules don't apply to him. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. He believes his personal artistic whims are more important than our shared community standards. She held up a photo of my cabin, the colors looking garish and loud under the harsh fluorescent lights of the gym. "This is not about beige versus blue," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "This is about one person deciding he is above the rest of us. If we let one person ignore the rules, where does it stop? What happens to our property values? What happens to the peaceful environment we cherish?" It was brilliant. In 5 minutes, she'd transformed me from a guy who picked the wrong paint into a threat to their entire way of life. I watched faces turn towards me. Neighbors who'd smiled and waved just yesterday now looked at me with suspicion, with hostility. I saw them whispering to each other, their eyes darting over to me. A man in the front row, someone I'd chatted with about fishing just last week, shook his head in disgust. The feeling of 200 pairs of eyes on you, judging you, is a heavy weight. It presses down on your chest, makes it hard to breathe. I stood up to speak, but the mood was already set. My voice sounded thin in the cavernous space. "This is a misrepresentation," I started. "The colors have historical significance." "Here we go again with the history excuse," a voice called out from the back. Laughter followed. Karen held up a hand for quiet, a queen magnanimously quieting her court. "Mr. Sullivan has had his opportunity to comply," she said. "The board has been more than patient." I felt my face flush with a helpless rage. They weren't listening. They didn't want to. They wanted a villain, and Karen had served me up on a platter. I felt utterly alone, an outsider surrounded by a mob that had already made up its mind. It was a public shaming, orchestrated perfectly. The gym, a place of community games and gatherings, had been turned into an arena, and I was the one facing the lions. I sat back down, the sound of my own blood pounding in my ears. I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned to see an old man with watery eyes and a kind, wrinkled face. It was Bob, the retired county surveyor. He'd lived here for 50 years. He leaned in close, his voice a low whisper against the noise. "Don't let her get to you, son," he rasped. "That woman's been a storm cloud over this valley since she got here." He paused, then added, "These old hills have secrets. She's messing with things she doesn't understand." His words were a small, unexpected anchor in a sea of hostility. When the meeting finally ended, with a vote to uphold all board decisions regarding aesthetic compliance, I didn't wait around. I walked out into the cool night air, the buzz of the crowd still ringing in my ears. I had been publicly branded a pariah. My reputation was shot. But as I walked, Bob's words echoed in my head. "These old hills have secrets." What secrets? I had no idea. But for the first time, I felt a flicker of something other than anger. It was curiosity. The game had changed again. This wasn't just my fight anymore. The board had turned the community against me. I had 0 allies. It was time to find some leverage in a place they'd never think to look. I headed for the one place that deals in old secrets, the county archives. The county archives smelled of time itself, a dry, dusty scent of aging paper and forgotten ink. It was a quiet place, a library of ghosts. I'd followed old Bob's advice, vague as it was. If Karen was using the present to attack me, maybe I could find a weapon in the past. He'd mentioned old reclamation plans, something about the lake being different 50 or 60 years ago. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot I had. Behind a large oak desk sat a young woman who couldn't have been more than 23. Her name tag read Lisa. She had bright, intelligent eyes that lit up when I told her what I was looking for. Most people probably came in looking for birth certificates or property deeds. Old hydrological surveys from the 1960s were a welcome change of pace. "Reclamation plans for the north shore of Miller's Lake," she said, her fingers flying across a keyboard. "That would be in the sub-basement, the old county engineering department files. Most of them haven't been digitized. You're going to have to get your hands dirty." She gave me a conspiratorial grin. "It's more fun that way." She led me down a narrow spiral staircase to a cool, dimly lit basement. Rows of tall metal shelves stretched into the gloom, crammed with thick canvas-bound ledgers and long cardboard tubes. The air was still and cool. Lisa pulled a rolling ladder over to one of the shelves. "It should be in this section. Good luck." For hours I worked my way through the dusty records. I unrolled brittle yellowed blueprints that cracked at the edges. I pored over engineering reports typed on manual typewriters, the letters slightly uneven, It was a history of the land written in technical drawings and survey data. I felt a strange connection to the men who had drawn these lines and written these reports, a professional kinship across the decades. They were trying to understand and shape this land just like me. Then I found it. It was a large blueprint, dated 1967, the Miller's Lake Watershed Filtration and Drainage Plan. My heart started beating a little faster. I carefully unrolled it on a large table, weighting the corners down. The blueprint showed the entire North Shore, the area where our community now stood. I found my plot of land easily, marked by the old survey coordinates. And then I saw it. My guest cabin, the source of all this trouble, was built directly on top of a spot marked with a small circular symbol. And next to the symbol were 2 letters, MP, monitoring point. A faint line snaked from that point down to the lake, and another set of lines connected it to a whole network of what looked like underground drainage channels. The entire area was designated as a critical filtration zone, and there, in the bottom corner of the blueprint, in the box for the lead engineer, was a signature that made the air leave my lungs in a rush. A.J. Albright, my old mentor, the man whose career I had inadvertently ruined. It felt like a ghost had just walked into the room. He had been here. He had designed this. This wasn't just a random piece of land. It was part of his plan, a plan to keep the lake clean. I stood there, staring at his familiar, precise signature. All the guilt and shame I'd carried for years came rushing back. But underneath it, something else was stirring, a wild, improbable idea. What if the colors on my cabin weren't just a whim? What if they were a code? I thought back to my training with Albright. He was obsessed with simple visual coding systems for his field teams. Color coding for soil strata, for water tables, for potential hazards. Ochre for filtering soil composites. Blue for clean water aquifers. The colors on my sign. They weren't a design choice. They were a label. A door had just opened. A door Karen had no idea even existed. She thought she was fighting a homeowner over a bucket of paint. She had no clue she was taking a crowbar to a 60-year-old piece of environmental engineering. I carefully rolled up the blueprint. Lisa helped me get a high-resolution scan of it onto a flash drive. "Find what you were looking for?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. "I think so," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. "I think I found a lot more than that." I walked out of the archives and back into the bright afternoon sun, the world looking sharper, clearer. The weight of the flash drive in my pocket felt heavy, like a weapon. The game was no longer about defending myself. It was about revealing the truth. And my first step was to go see the one man who might remember it all. Old Bob, the surveyor. You know that feeling when you think you finally got the upper hand? That moment of pure, uncut confidence when you see the path to victory laid out before you? Hold on to that feeling, because it's usually the exact moment the universe decides to pull the rug out from under you. I found Bob on his porch, whittling a piece of wood. The shavings fell around his worn boots like snowflakes. I showed him the scan of the blueprint on my laptop, his eyes, clouded by age, sharpened with recognition. He leaned in, a low whistle escaping his lips. "Well, I'll be," he breathed, "the Albright plan. Haven't seen this in 40 years. He confirmed my suspicion. The whole development was built on a delicate watershed. The old engineers, Albright's team, had designed a sophisticated natural drainage and filtration system to protect the lake. The colors I'd used weren't just a code. They were the official markers for that system. "Those old timers weren't fools," Bob said, tapping the screen. "Every line, every color meant something. This here, your cabin, it's sitting on the heart of the whole thing." My confidence surged. I had it. Irrefutable proof. A historical document that trumped Karen's flimsy book of rules. But my next move was my biggest mistake. Instead of keeping it close to my chest, I got cocky. I sent an email to the Homeowners Association board, attaching the scanned blueprint and a brief, triumphant explanation. I essentially laid all my cards on the table. I thought I was delivering a checkmate. In reality, I was just telling my enemy exactly where to aim her cannons. The counterattack was swift and vicious. The very next morning, I woke up to my phone buzzing off the nightstand. It was a client, a big one. He was pulling his contract. "Sorry, Mike," he said, his voice uncomfortable. "We can't be associated with this." "Associated with what?" I asked, confused. He sent me a link. It was to the community's online forum. An anonymous post had appeared overnight. It detailed, with cruel accuracy, the story of my last project with Albright. The story of the chemical spill, the environmental damage, the public inquiry that ended my mentor's career. The post painted me not as a well-meaning scientist who made a mistake, but as a reckless, incompetent hack, a disgraced hydro consultant trying to pull a fast one on the community. Have you ever had your worst failure thrown back in your face? It feels like being stripped naked in a town square. The post was a character assassination. It twisted my past into a weapon against me. My discovery of the blueprint was no longer a brilliant piece of detective work. It was the desperate act of a charlatan trying to justify his own code violations. My phone buzzed again. Another client. Another contract canceled. My professional life was being torched, one email at a time. As if on cue, a white truck pulled up my driveway. A man with a clipboard and an air of officious boredom got out. He was from a private environmental inspection company I'd never heard of. "We've had an anonymous complaint about an unpermitted septic system modification," he said, not meeting my eye. He walked around my property, making notes, and then handed me a stop work order. He'd found several potential violations. To clear them, I'd need a full system overhaul. The estimated cost on the form was $15,000. I stood there, holding the order, the pieces clicking into place. The anonymous post, the canceled contracts, this bogus inspection, it was all coordinated. Karen hadn't just ignored my proof. She'd used my own history to discredit me, then hit me where it hurt the most, my wallet. This was her real power, not the rulebook, not the board meetings. It was her network, her willingness to fight dirty. She had turned my ace into a liability and buried me under a mountain of financial and reputational ruin. I was cornered. My savings were dwindling, my income was gone, and now I was facing a crippling repair bill. It was a false victory, a perfectly executed trap. I looked at my cabin, the source of it all, and for the first time, I felt a wave of profound defeat wash over me. She had won. The game was over. I sank down onto my porch steps, the stop work order fluttering in my hand, and just stared into space. The silence was absolute. Defeat has a taste. It's coppery and stale, like old blood. I sat on those porch steps for what felt like an eternity, the world muted and gray. Every path I'd taken had led to a dead end. Logic failed. History was twisted against me. My professional reputation, the one thing I had left, was in flames. I was isolated, broke, and publicly humiliated. What would you do in that situation, when every door you try is slammed in your face? For a minute, I thought about just giving up, painting the damn cabin beige, paying the fines, and crawling away. Then, my gaze fell on the old fluorometer, sitting on the porch rail where I'd left it. Its scarred metal surface caught the afternoon light. It was a relic from a past I was trying to escape, a symbol of my greatest failure. But it was also a symbol of Albright. He wasn't just a brilliant engineer, he was a fighter. He taught me that every system has a vulnerability. Every structure has a breaking point. You just have to find it. And that's when it hit me. An idea so simple, so direct, it was almost elegant. I had been trying to fight Karen with paper, blueprints, bylaws, emails, but her power wasn't on paper. It was in the real world, in money, in fear, in reputation. So I had to fight her there. I wasn't going to prove I was right. I was going to prove she was wrong in a way no one could ignore. Water, I thought. The whole fight started with water, and that's how I would end it. Water remembers everything. My first call was to Bob. My second was to Lisa at the archives. My third, and this was a long shot, was to Henderson, the terrified accountant from the board. I didn't threaten him. I just asked him a simple question. Do you know where Karen's company, the one that manages the Homeowners Association funds, is incorporated? I'm just curious about their liability insurance. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, a quiet click. He'd hung up. But 20 minutes later, an anonymous email landed in my inbox. No subject, no text. Just a single attachment. A PDF of the Homeowners Association's contract with a company called Mountain Peak Homes. The developer, and in that contract were the details of a planned buyout. Mountain Peak was systematically making offers on lakeside properties, but only after the Homeowners Association had devalued them through a series of fines and compliance violations. It was a classic squeeze play. Karen wasn't just a power-tripping president. She was a corporate raider in a sensible blazer. Henderson had flipped. He was scared, but he was more scared of being an accessory to federal fraud. Now I had the motive, but motive isn't proof. The proof was still in the ground, in the water. I spent the next 2 days preparing. I pulled out every hydrological map I owned. I used my own money, what little was left, to buy a drum of non-toxic biodegradable fluorescent tracer dye, the kind we used for tracking groundwater flows. It was harmless, but intensely visible under the right light. The night before the annual Lakeside Summer Fair, a big community event, I went to work. Under the cover of darkness, I walked the perimeter of the development. Using Albright's old blueprint as my guide, I found what I was looking for: a series of storm drains and septic overflows, all cleverly hidden by landscaping. The very systems Karen and her board were supposed to be maintaining with our dues. The systems that were, I suspected, completely failing. I poured the dye into a storm drain, located right behind Karen's own meticulously manicured property. The vibrant green liquid swirled and vanished into the darkness. It was a whisper sent into the earth. Now, all I had to do was wait for the earth to shout back. As I walked home, the weight of the old fluorometer in my backpack felt different. It wasn't a reminder of my failure anymore. It felt like a sword. The fair was tomorrow. Showtime. The board was sponsoring a big presentation by the developer, Mountain Peak Homes. It was meant to be their victory lap. Funny thing is, sometimes the finish line is also the starting point for a whole different race. The day of the fair was perfect. A brilliant cloudless sky, a light breeze coming off the water, the kind of day that makes people feel good about their community. Tents were set up on the great lawn by the lake, the air filled with the smell of popcorn and grilled hot dogs. At the center of it all was a large stage, where a slick representative from Mountain Peak Homes was standing next to a beaming Karen. They were unveiling a glossy diorama of their new, exclusive lakeside village. They spoke of enhanced property values, of luxury, of a bright new future for the community. I stood at the back of the crowd, listening. My heart was a cold, heavy lump in my chest. This was it. Everything hinged on the next 10 minutes. I saw Bob give me a slight, encouraging nod from across the lawn. Lisa was there too, holding a folder, looking nervous but determined. When the developer finished his speech to a round of polite applause, I made my move. I walked towards the stage. A couple of the private security guards Karen had hired moved to intercept me, but I just held up my fluorometer. "I'm not here to cause trouble," I said, my voice loud enough for those nearby to hear. "I'm here to give a free water quality demonstration." Heads turned. Karen's smile tightened. "Mr. Sullivan, this is a private event," she said into the microphone, her voice hard. "It's a community event, Karen," I corrected her, stepping onto the edge of the stage. "And this community has a right to know what's in their lake." I turned to the crowd. "You've all been paying increased dues for environmental maintenance. You've been told it's to protect the jewel of our community, this beautiful lake. I'd like to show you where your money is going." Before she could stop me, I walked to the edge of the lake, just a few feet from the stage. The water lapped gently at the shore. It looked clear, pristine. "Looks clean, right?" I asked the crowd, which was now silent, watching me. I knelt down and switched on my fluorometer, lowering the sensor into the water. A low, steady beep began to emanate from the device. A few people craned their necks to see. Then, the beeping started to speed up. Beep, beep, beep. Faster and faster, until it became a high-pitched, insistent shriek that cut through the festive atmosphere like a siren. On the digital display, the numbers were spinning, climbing to a level that indicated severe contamination. A gasp went through the crowd. Karen's face had gone pale. "This is a trick! His equipment is faulty!" she stammered into the mic. "Is it?" I said calmly. I pulled a high-powered UV flashlight from my pocket and shone its purple beam into the water. The effect was immediate and horrifying. The clear water erupted in a sickening, ghostly green glow. The fluorescent dye I had poured into the storm drain 24 hours ago had found its way, unfiltered, directly into the lake. It was a toxic-looking cloud, spreading from an outflow pipe hidden just beneath the surface. the same outflow pipe that was supposed to be part of a multi-stage filtration system. That, I said, my voice ringing with cold fury, is what 60 years of neglect and embezzled maintenance funds looks like. The system your ancestors built to protect this lake has failed, and your Homeowners Association board knew it. They've been hiding it, letting this water get poisoned, all so they could drive down your property values and sell your homes for pennies on the dollar to their developer friends. At that moment, Lisa stepped forward and began handing out copies of the contract between the HOA and Mountain Peak Homes. Bob was handing out copies of Albright's original blueprint. The murmurs in the crowd grew into a roar of outrage. People were looking at their pristine lake, now glowing with the evidence of corruption, then at the glossy diorama of the future, and finally at Karen, whose face had crumpled into a mask of pure panic. The developer didn't even try to defend himself. He packed up his diorama and was gone in under 5 minutes. The fallout was immediate. The EPA launched a full-scale investigation. The Homeowners Association was dissolved, its board facing a barrage of federal charges and civil lawsuits. Karen's reign was over, not with a vote, but with the undeniable truth glowing in the water. I had won. I had cleared my name, but here's the thing about winning. It comes with a price. A few days later, I got a call. It was my old mentor, Albright. He'd seen the news. I expected him to be proud. Instead, his voice was tired. "You won, Michael," he said. "You exposed them, but you used my work, my plans, as a weapon. You proved them wrong, but you didn't build anything. You just burned their house down." He sighed. "I guess some things never change." He hung up. The sting of his words was sharper than any of Karen's attacks. He was right. I had saved the community, but I'd done it with anger, not with purpose. I'd won the battle, but I was still fighting my own war. That evening, I walked down to my guest cabin. I took down the temporary board I'd put up and began work on a new sign. I used the same colors, ochre and blue, but this time, I wasn't just making a statement. The county, as part of the remediation plan, had officially designated my cabin as monitoring point 1. My sign wasn't a protest anymore. It was a promise. I stood back and looked at it, the old fluorometer in my hand. The lake was quiet again. I had my peace. But I knew, deep down, that the cost of that peace was a silence between me and the one man whose approval I had always craved. And some things you just can't fix with a new sign.